Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for April 5th, 2023. Today I'm going to be speaking about what you can do to make sure we can make a successful transition out of hell. We're living at a moment between two paradigms. On the one side, you have the collapsing neoliberal system, which is sometimes known as the unipolar order or the rules-based order. It's a system of vast inequality in which the wealthy and the process of looting is enforced by hybrid warfare such as censorship and corrupt media lying, and also coups and wars for the benefit of billionaires, not for the benefit of people. Now, there's emerging a new paradigm, which is in opposition to that, based on a system of mutual benefit, of economic development as opposed to austerity and scarcity. And it's a move out from under the dollar, which has been the instrument of the oppression of the former colonial world and is increasingly looting the wealth from those people in the so-called advanced sector. Now, the old order is in trouble of its own making. The policies of deregulation, of privatization, of free trade, of speculation, of the attack on sovereignty. What this has done is to rob nations of their ability to act in the interests of their population, and instead imposed on them an order which benefits the few. Now, this is the same order that's pursuing a war against Russia and China, that previously conducted wars against Iraq, against Afghanistan, against Libya, against Serbia, and is now using Ukraine to try to weaken or break up Russia, and is threatening to do the same thing in the Pacific to China. It's a war that can't be won without triggering a possible nuclear World War III. But we're seeing desperate actions to protect and defend this old order. For example, globetrotting by people like Secretary of State Blinken, Vice President Harris, the witch of the neocons, Victoria Nuland. They're going around the world giving lectures, telling countries how to be democratic. The latest affront to the United States was when Harris arrived in Zambia, and the opposition leader issued a statement saying that you're a country that has killed our leaders and conducted coups against our governments. How dare you come here to lecture us on democracy? You have these leaders extolling democracy while backing a government in Ukraine, which has shut down opposition press, shut down opposition political parties, and is now in the process of stealing a church, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, putting under house arrest the leader, threatening the people at the church, grabbing the church monastery during Easter time. I thought freedom of religion was part of democracy. In what world is this democracy? And yet the Zelensky government is moving ahead, even though the leader of this church, who's now in an ankle bracelet under house arrest, has denounced the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Still, they're attacking this church. And then you have the indictment against President Donald Trump on 34 counts. The charges are bogus, and recognized as a fraud, except for those with Trump derangement syndrome. But listen to what the president of El Salvador had to say about the case against Trump. This is President Bukele, who said, quote, "Imagine if this happened in any other country where a government arrested the main opposition candidate. The U.S. ability to use democracy as foreign policy is gone," said El Salvador's President Bukele. Similarly, we have the statement at the so-called Summit for Democracy by Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who on March 29th said, quote, "Many of the great crimes against humanity have been committed in the name of God or in the name of democracy. In our time," he continued, "there's still a mixture of oligarchy and democracy, or a simulated and mediated democracy. That is to say, in some countries, the oligarchy reigns with the facade of democracy. And Lopez Obrador continues. For example, how can we talk about democracy if the elites dominate and not the majorities? How can we talk about democracy if there's no separation of economic power and political power? And he continues, how can we talk about democracy if in recent times there's been the most offensive concentration of wealth in a few hands in the history of the world? The fortune of the minority has increased without limits, without any moral concern, while there are 1 billion human beings who live on less than $1 a day. So that's from Lopez Obrador, the president of Mexico. So this Summit for Democracy isn't fooling anyone except for the people who don't know what's actually going on in the rest of the world. Now, do people like Blinken and Biden and Harris and Nuland really believe what they're saying? If so, they're living in la-la land, in a state of delusion. And this represents a danger to all humanity. While they try to bail out their collapsing financial system, and I'll have more on that tomorrow, some very interesting comments coming from Switzerland in particular. And while they're pushing ahead for a two-front war, the majority of nations are organizing for a just world where nations cooperate when and where possible and negotiate and engage in dialogue where there are differences. Now, I want to read you the lament of Senator Marco Rubio, Little Marco as he's known, who was complaining about this move away from the dollar in a discussion with Sean Hannity. Here's what Rubio said, referring to the agreement between Brazil and China to conduct trade in their national currencies, not in dollars. He said that the two nations are, quote, creating a secondary economy in the world totally independent of the United States, unquote. Well, he's right, but it's only independent of the United States because the United States is refusing to listen to the legitimate concerns of the rest of the world. So they've had to take matters into their own hands. But here's the crux of the matter for Rubio. Quote, we won't have to talk about sanctions in 5 years because there will be so many countries transacting in currencies other than the dollar that we won't have the ability to sanction them, unquote. Well, that's Rubio crying about the U.S. ability to kill children, to destroy nations, because we're losing the power of the dollar. Now, when you realize that this transition is underway, but you're not hearing about it because we have a corrupt media, which uses censorship, which uses false news, fake news, to keep people under an umbrella, which tells us that we're the good guys and the rest of the world are the bad guys. Americans and Europeans are being prevented from knowing about this transition and prevented from seeing Western leaders being addressed in terms that they're not accustomed to. For example, their lectures about democracy are being met by a forceful rebuttal, as when Naledi Pandor, the South African foreign minister, informed Blinken, who was lecturing her on why South Africa must support the sanctions against Russia. She reminded Blinken that South Africa is a sovereign nation. Don't come here to bully us. That's increasingly what's being said in the rest of the world. Did you know that? And do you realize that these other leaders from the so-called global South, which is actually becoming the global majority, are speaking in the interests of their people? And in fact, they're speaking in your interest because the same people bullying them are telling you that the banking system is sound as you're losing your future savings, and are telling you that we're winning a war in Ukraine when we're spending $100 billion plus to kill off Ukrainians and Russians for the purposes of expanding NATO to the Russian borders and into Russia itself. Now, tomorrow I'll have an update on the crisis of the dollar and the banking system and the moves toward a new system. But I want to remind you that later today, I'll be hosting an interview, a dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. It will be at 11 a.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Central Time. The link for it is down below in the description section. And it's an opportunity for you to communicate with Mrs. LaRouche, that you can ask questions, make comments, and you can send them to us at questions@schillerinstitute.org. So join us for that. I also have a link for our upcoming conference on the 15th and 16th of April. We're going to make sure that the United States is present in this transition, not as an opposition force, but as a collaborator for justice in the world. Thanks for joining me. See you tomorrow. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.